I'm talking with my colleague Stephen Revell about the changing role of partner. What are the major changes you're seeing at the moment, Stephen?
Well, I think one of the major changes I'm seeing is this collective realization amongst law firms across the world that this assumption that we're all partners, we know what to do, isn't actually true. And I'm encouraging all the law firms I work with to have a clearly written description of the role of a partner. Another way of expressing is, what do we expect of each other as partners? And I think to the extent I see a single trend in this area, it's getting clarity on what we expect of each other as partners through that written description of the role of a partner. Because through that, we can actually mentor our partners, develop our partners, dare I say it, create the partners that we actually want in our law firm because they know what to do, and importantly, increasingly importantly, hold partners accountable and measure their performance against some sort of benchmark. How can we say to a partner, you're not pulling your weight, when we have no description of what weight means?
I mean, I've known you for 20 years. I think we've had this conversation 20 years ago or 15 years ago. So this seems very straightforward, doesn't it? What's holding firms back from having this proper, open conversation?
Well, I think some of it is this belief that we all know it, we don't need to write it down. And I think get over that very quickly. Yes, yes. If it's that clear, it's very easy to write down. Yeah. I think many firms find when they write it down, there are actually some challenges in describing it. I think the other issue that many firms face is the role of partners, in my view, evolves over time. And certainly those firms with a gated remuneration system of some sort are focused on what it takes to get from one through a gate, from one level to another. And that really does need a description of the role of partner in terms of what are we asking you to step up to get through the gate. So I think remuneration systems have driven some firms to think harder about that role of partner. But I find it really odd that firms find this a difficult concept. Yeah. I think all firms should have it. They should review it. I know of firms that have it, but actually none of the partners know they've got it. Yeah. So I think, when you've got it, flaunt it. Make sure the partners fully understand. And I think one way of doing that is during the appraisal process, the first thing the appraiser does is get out the description of a role of partner in our firm and ask in a very open way, how do you think you're doing?
When we ask firms about how they're evaluating partners, we often get a 20-page list of KPIs, and then you interview the partners and you say, what's rewarded here? And they say, well, it's all about how much money you bring in. Do you think that's still the case, or do you think that will continue to be the case or not?
Well, I do. Some of this is about, I think, having a system that is simple enough to explain in a few pages, not 20 pages. I mean, we're working with a firm at the moment, as you know, and they sent us the 20-page description, and none of the partners knew what we were talking about.
Well, I'm blaming the Big Four. I'm not going to mention the firm in particular, but whenever they send you that 20-page or 40-page document, you know which one of the Big Four has advised them on their balanced scorecard. Yeah. And you know that, as you say, if you ask the partners what's being rewarded here, how do you know what success is? They find it hard to explain that.
I think there's also a tendency for the line partner to assume it's all about money. Yeah. It's all about how much I'm billing. And the rest of this is just greenwashing, or the equivalent there too. And therefore, I do think there has to be very clear messaging from the leadership in a firm that, no, it isn't just about money. Yes, we're expecting financial performance, but that is one part of the overall performance that we're expecting. And firms have to walk the walk as well as talk the talk, that they need to reward good contributions in addition to financial performance. And they need, and this is much braver, if a partner is performing well financially, but is behaving badly You need to do something about it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's jump in. What is the other stuff that partners have to do apart from building a profitable business?
Well, for me, there's two that leap out, and you and I often debate which order I should say them in. I'm going to say it in my order: clients and people.
Yeah.
Partners need to build strong client relationships, and through those relationships, drive revenue. It's about the relationship. It's not about marketing. It's not about business development, whatever those things might mean in different firms. It's about the strength of the relationship between the firm, as led by the partner, and the client. And again, I emphasize it's about the relationship between the firm, not just the individual partner. I think also the responsibility for people almost goes without saying. You know, we're in a talent war, I think, in virtually every jurisdiction we're advising in at the moment. I think every firm starts the conversation with, we can't get enough people and we're having to pay them too much. And it's driven by different factors in different markets, but that's the punchline for virtually every firm we're talking to at the moment.
Yeah. So what are the metrics we can put around this? Let's start off with the clients. I mean, is this about, I know it when I see it, and you have to have a remuneration committee you trust, or is it an ability to put clear, hard data around that, which avoids some of that, what we often see is suspicion, no? I mean, if it's not managed, it won't be monitored. If it's not monitored, it won't be rewarded. So in terms of clients, what are the KPIs we could include on the list?
So I'm a fan of a somewhat subjective approach. So I believe the best remuneration systems are the ones where the partners trust the people making the decisions, whether it's a committee, whether it's the founding partner, whatever the system, you've got to have trust in the system. But I believe that can be supported with some KPIs. Yeah. And so I'm not suggesting that we get rid of KPIs and data, but I think we need to see them in support. So, for example, I think we could measure how many client meetings a partner has. Yeah. And that's a bit of base data. Yeah. But actually, it's not telling us.
And if you put that to KPI, no surprise that we'll be recording client meetings. And if you give me a KPI on newsletters, I'll be writing a newsletter every week. So we have both seen the uses and abuses of some of these KPIs. What would be the better ones, perhaps?
So for me, the best one for clients is talk to the client. Yeah. You can't let the partner you're appraising talk to the client because, again, we know what answers we'll get. Somebody senior, typically within the firm, needs to go and talk to the key clients of the firm. By the way, you should be doing that anyway. But as part of that conversation, you say, how is Stephen doing? Yeah. Is he introducing you to other partners? Is he there for you when you need him? You ask some questions and you develop an idea as to how good Stephen is with regard to the client. You talk to 5 clients and you begin to get a clear picture that either Stephen needs to try a bit harder or he's doing a good job. And that then becomes the basis of the discussion in the appraisal.
I mean, I'm going to be devil's advocate here. There is one metric for client relationships. That's your revenue and your profitability. So we have a metric for developing good client relationships.
And again, when we look at the data, I do think numbers are an important part of that data. You know, if you're not billing, you probably haven't got any client relationships. And therefore, I agree with you. I think billing is an important data point, but it shouldn't be the only data point, and it can be a misleading data point. Yes, yeah. I could be a great originator, and I could be feeding 10 partners, all of whom are showing great numbers, but my own numbers are low because I'm spending the time on origination. Yeah. And that's because I'm good at client relationships. Now, I think that in that situation, the partner who is good at origination needs to stay as a touch point on the jobs that he's originating. He needs to stay close to the client. The client needs to believe that he or she is playing a role in each of those matters. And therefore, there should be some billables that go with it. But let's not get distracted by looking at billables only when we're trying to measure the quality of a partner's ability to build client relationships.
So can we talk about origination and share some stories about the debates we get into about origination? Because in many of the firms we work with, it is the issue. How are we rewarding origination? I mean, how would you handle that? It's such a hot issue for many of the law firms.
It is, and you and I spend a lot of time with the firms we're working with to try and help them define a system that works for them.
The perfect system, the perfect metric around origination.
And I think if there's one thing we've learned is there is no perfect system. It's to do with the culture of the firm, the culture of collaboration within the firm. I think, as you mentioned a moment ago, we've got to be careful that we come up with metrics that people then game, and that's not good for any firm. I remember stories in my career, I ended up bringing in a lot of lateral partners. And I remember one story of a partner we recruited from a US law firm that told me about this lineup of partners, not their secretaries, not their associates, of partners outside the so-called bill room, the accounting room, on a Monday morning with their file opening forms to make sure they got the file opening form in before any other partners. That's not a good use of partner time. So finding something that rewards and respects origination without trying to drive it into, I am Mr. 10%. I get 10% of everything I originate means that I'm hogging the client relationship, probably. I'm the answer to everything so far as the client's concerned, as opposed to making sure I'm introducing my colleagues and building a broader relationship.
And then we've got the fixation with the billable hour, no? Because if you're going to reward me based on billable hours, I will ensure that I do lots of billable hours. Is it the right work? Is it the right clients? Is it profitable? Is something else, no?
I agree. I think we've been fixated on the billable hour way too long. As you say, it's not even a measure of revenue. It's a measure of how much time I have chosen to record.
Yeah.
It may not be the right number, and therefore it's false data to begin with. As you say, at best, it's about a revenue number. It's not about a profitability number. And as I think the client demand for change, for value billing, so-called value billing, away from the chargeable hour comes, that will be a good thing. I think many law firms need to drive that change because the danger is they're overcharging for simple work, and the clients certainly don't like that. But actually they're undercharging for the more complex work because they're locked into the chargeable hour as being the perfect measure. It is not.
And finally, I think the last issue is in terms of our people. How do we know, or how are we evaluating our partners in their ability to develop their teams?
Well, that brings us back to the responsibility of partners for people. And I think it's about keeping our people busy. I mean, most of our associates develop well because they're busy. If they're not busy, they don't develop. We mentioned COVID a couple of sessions ago. COVID in the early years created a lot of people who were not getting the experience that they would have got in normal times. And I think we're still correcting for that. But being busy, learning on the job is the best way that an associate develops. So one of my tests for good leadership of a team leader is, are they keeping the team busy? And are they spreading the work across the team? And equally importantly, are they ensuring that each associate gets a good mix of work? When I look at data, and I remember it back when I was a partner, about why people leave a law firm, it usually, at least their given reason, isn't about I'm being paid more. It's about I wasn't getting the mix of work, the variety of work that I thought I would get by joining this firm. I'm disappointed that I didn't get that mix, and therefore I'm leaving to a firm that is promising me that mix.
Because you'll give work to Murray because he's your favourite junior, and then Murray will learn, and you'll go back with the next piece of work to Murray, but Mary's sitting in the room next door, not sure what to do.
And that's the danger. And for me, using Murray every time is the lazy option, because I know he can do it and will need less supervision. I'm going to have to invest some time in Mary, in your example, to get her to the same level. But that's my job as a leader. I should be doing that.
And what's our metric around this? Are we going to find metrics and scoring very hard in this area?
We are, I think. But I think looking at exit interviews, How many people from your team are leaving and for what reason? That tells us a lot. It's not a traditional KPI. It's not a number, but actually really valuable information. And I think partly, my view of KPIs, you need to look at data and information, not just a number that comes out of a system. And for me, looking at exit interviews isn't subjective. It becomes objective because, assuming we have enough data, it is telling us a story that then informs the appraisal.
And as a partner, how does it feel being evaluated, and what do you think works well, or what have you seen that's challenging around for the associates to evaluate partners?
I think they do find it difficult. I think partners find it difficult evaluating other partners, even if it's anonymous. In small partnerships, anonymity doesn't really work. You're bound to know. So I do think we need to change the culture in many firms to have a much more open discussion about our strengths and weaknesses. And again, we should view this as something that partnerships can deliver better than corporate organizations. We shouldn't be as hierarchical as a corporate organization, being concerned of showing our weaknesses. We should be, as partners, supportive of each other and focusing on how we can help each other develop, often through collaboration.
So yes, so we're seeing a move away from the financial KPIs only, and we understand why we're seeing that. But the qualitative aspects are harder and the quantitative aspects are much simpler. As you said, you need to trust the people doing that evaluation. You have to you all have to understand and trust the criteria. But what happens to those smaller firms? We work a lot with the best domestic firms. Either if there's a strong founder or strong personality that everyone trusts, they're the benevolent dictator that has the legitimacy to make decisions about how much money people earn. But it's not easy in a 10 or 20 partner firm to do this, is it?
It's not. I mean, we both worked with some firms of that size, and I would say the typical model is either you've got, I like the word benign dictator rather than benevolent dictator, but you've got the founder of the firm typically that everyone trusts. He developed the firm, and typically it is a he developed the firm, and he's got the firm's best interests at heart. No issues. The challenge for many firms is what happens when that person retires. And I think if I had to pick the model that I think works best, it's probably 3-partner committee.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the 3 most senior partners, although I'd say that's the most common. Yeah. I think having a voice at least from the middle level of the partnership, because they talk to the future more so than the senior partners. But having a small group, and in my mind, 3 is probably the smallest if you move from 1. You go to 3, not 2. But again, they have to be trusted to make fair decisions. And so the trust is built through the way in which they decide. But I would argue their job is made much easier if you've got a description of the role of partner that all partners understand and becomes the benchmark for determining how they have performed and therefore typically what their remuneration is.
Yeah. So in terms of what comes next, I mean, I think the most recent development that we're seeing is everyone realized, the larger firms realized they had to have clear KPIs. Some of them went down the wrong path. And again, no criticism meant of the big 4 advisors that went in them and advised them on these very heavy systems, not only the data, but also that qualitative approach. You have to put in place guardrails, so there has to be an understanding of what's expected, and the guardrails could be gateways in some cases. However, it's such a time-consuming process. And one thing I think that we're seeing more of now is could be annual review around some clearer KPIs, and they could be heavily financial-led. But when it comes to those 3-year check-ins to go up a gateway or around your guardrails, that's when you do the serious lifting and you get into this in detail. But for lots of our firms, as you know, I mean, it is a 3-month process every year to evaluate their partners against this, and that may not be the best use of their time.
I agree. I think to the extent I'm seeing the beginnings of a trend that goes to answering your question, it's moving to a 2 or possibly 3-year review.
Yeah.
So you continue at your level, whatever that might be, for a 2 or 3 year period rather than a 1 year period. And I think that has other advantages in terms of creating stability within the partnership. But I also think it reduces the time spent.
Yeah.
What I would do, though, in that situation is not leave it 3 years and the committee never talks to the partner. I think there has to be some form of regular discussion that isn't a review, but is a touching base, is an understanding what's happening.
Well, can we not then throw away the word partner evaluation and talk about partner development and turn this upside down and say, how can we as the leadership help you as partners develop? What are your learning objectives? And how can we have more regular check-ins and conversations with what's going well in your practice? What are your challenges? And how can we help you to achieve that?
And I think too many managing partners get lost in the numbers and the admin of the firm, particularly larger firms. And they need to get out of those weeds and focus on leading the firm as opposed to managing the firm.
Isn't that funny? So it's that question of law firms are under-led and over-managed. They're very able to get their best leaders and put them in management roles where they fail, but they're not very good at seeing the leadership skills